Sexuality Part 3. Do Christians hate homosexuals? I've often heard influential voices in our culture claim that it is discriminating and hateful for Christians to believe that homosexuals are sinners and they're going to hell unless they stop being homosexual. This is a completely misleading claim. Why? Because Christians also think heterosexual lust and promiscuity are wrong, and pride, and greed, and self-righteousness, and gossip, and jealousy, and selfishness, and on and on. All of these things make all people sinners and separate us from God, which is the essence of hell. These voices are simply taking one area of sexual sin and hyper-focusing on it to make it sound like Christianity is unfairly opposed to one segment of the population. Take me, for example. I've struggled with and continue to struggle with many of the sins I just mentioned my whole life. So logically, according to this claim, I'm being, quote, discriminating and hateful toward myself and everyone else in the world simply because I believe in a universal moral standard that nobody perfectly keeps. It doesn't make any sense. This is just an empty political slogan used to divide and manipulate people. Having said that, I do think it's understandable why this claim is so prominent given how the last few decades have unfolded. In my lifetime, I feel like I've observed two major transitions take place in America in the collective relationship between Christians and advocates of homosexuality. The first transition took place in the 90s and 2000s when advocates of homosexuality fought for tolerance. Their argument was, look, we can agree to disagree. We can have contradicting beliefs and still treat one another with kindness and respect. This was a reasonable and respectable position, and it was very successful. The culture shifted significantly. A large percentage of people that still believed in traditional views of sex and marriage decided that homosexuals and really all people have a right to choose what lifestyle they want without harassment or mistreatment. I would include myself in this. The second transition took place in the 2010s when advocates of homosexuality fought for affirmation. Their argument, at least on the extreme end, was if you believe homosexuality is immoral, then this is a hateful view. It's hateful, bigoted, discriminating, and you need to change your beliefs. This is an intolerant message. The former message about tolerance mostly disappeared and was replaced by a hyper-polarizing false dilemma where people were basically told either you agree with us or you hate us. There's no middle ground. So we could perhaps summarize the progression like this. First, Christians treated homosexual advocates with intolerance, back when theirs was arguably the majority view in the culture. After the first transition, Christians and homosexual advocates appeared to briefly treat one another with tolerance. Of course, there were and still are countless counterexamples to this. This is just a general trend I felt like I observed. After the second transition, homosexual advocates began treating Christians with intolerance, now that theirs was arguably the majority view in the culture. As stated, my point here is just to share an observation, not to blame either group. In fact, it seems to be just symptomatic of human nature that any group in a society that holds a majority view often treats those with a minority view with some degree of intolerance, especially when there's cherished worldview implications involved. This may be partly due to the fact that intolerance is effective. When people fear they may be shamed or personally attacked for holding an unpopular view, many of them will abandon that view, go along to get along. This is currently happening with a lot of professing Christians, including Christian leaders, who are abandoning overtly biblical standards of sexual morality as they buckle under the pressure of false accusations that biblical beliefs are hateful and bigoted. Okay, let's address another common question. Some people feel attracted to the same sex from as early as they can remember. This leads people to ask Christians, how can you say homosexuality is immoral if it began early and involuntarily? Perhaps it's just the result of personality or genetic factors. This is a good point to raise. However, just because a trait begins early or comes naturally does not mean it cannot be immoral. For example, the first time I told a lie or stole something, I was about 4 or 5 years old. Many people I've talked to said the same thing. So lying and theft began early and naturally for me, but that doesn't mean those things can't possibly be immoral. Furthermore, personality or genetic factors can also make some people more prone to heterosexual lust or pride, or anger, or violence, or any number of traits that Christianity and other belief systems would identify as immoral. Here's another common objection. Christianity basically tells a homosexual person they have to stop being homosexual before they can be accepted by God or go to heaven, which is impossible. First, again, this objection hyper-focuses on one area of sexual sin while completely ignoring the fact that the exact same thing could be said of any number of things the Bible calls sin. For example, look at this passage from Galatians 5, which lists 15 behaviors or attitudes that can eternally separate a person from God if not repented of, despite some overlap. Second, I think it's important to point out that it is pointless and offensive to tell someone they are not living according to a standard they don't believe in and have no interest in following. In fact, not only is it pointless and offensive, it's unbiblical. For example, Paul told the Corinthians, "For what do I have to do with judging outsiders? Do you not judge those who are within the church? But those who are outside, God judges." The Christians in the Corinthian community had voluntarily chosen to submit themselves to Paul's leadership and were willing to be held accountable to biblical standards. However, I think a lot of the animosity toward Christians in our culture may be attributable to Christians wrongfully accusing people who never asked to be accountable to biblical standards and often have no interest whatsoever in those standards. In that scenario, they have every right to be offended. Now, if a homosexual person is sincerely considering adopting biblical Christianity, that's completely different. That person deserves a clear, straightforward answer on what the Bible teaches about homosexuality and any other topic he or she is interested in. And here's one thing I would say. The essence of becoming a Christian is surrender. Surrendering your life to the Lord and being willing to be helped to obey Him as you walk with Him. Everyone has different areas of their life that are especially difficult to surrender. For some people, it's their sexuality. This leads to another common objection I've heard. If someone is homosexual and wants to be a Christian, it basically means he or she can never have a loving, committed, romantic relationship, and that's tragic. This is another great point to raise. And it's true that some Christians with same-sex attraction choose to live lives of celibacy. However, there are also some Christians who were formerly homosexual and went on to be happily married in a heterosexual relationship. If God exists, it's not unreasonable to think that He can guide and shape our desires as we walk with Him, including our sexuality. In fact, it says in Psalm 37 that when we delight ourselves in the Lord, He gives us the desires of our heart. Not the things we desire, but the desires themselves come from Him. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out my free book, available with the link provided. Thanks for watching.